So we're kind of in this lull period of the offseason for the Bulls because while the Bulls season is over and as fans we're already kind of thinking about next season and what moves will be made to improve the roster, we're still in the midst of the playoffs and all the focus and attention is on that, which rightfully so. It's the most exciting time in the NBA. But because we're in this stagnant period for the Bulls anyway, you're not going to hear a lot when it comes to trade rumors, potential free agency acquisitions, and what the Bulls will be looking at. And part of that is because it is a bit of a waiting game. What's going to happen with some of these playoff teams if they fall short of expectations? What will it mean in terms of the potential players that could be on the chopping block based on how they show up in the playoffs? Players declining their player options if they're not happy with their roles. We also don't even know how the draft lottery is going to shake up when the lottery selection happens next week, which that in and of itself will have an impact on how the offseason goes down, especially for the Bulls if they're able to keep their pick and having it land in the top 4. But all of that said, the name we've been hearing about most in the past week, potentially being linked to the Bulls as a free agent target for the mid-level exception, is the Dallas Mavericks' Christian Wood, who is set to become an unrestricted free agent this summer. And most reports have indicated that Wood will not be returning to the Mavs next season, given his diminished role on the team and the lack of overall fit on the roster, as well as the fact that the Mavs are likely not going to be able to afford him if they in fact intend to re-sign Kyrie Irving, who is most likely going to be commanding a max contract, and giving Woods a sizable contract while also being able to round out the roster on small level deals would quickly put them over the tax line. Thus, in come the Bulls as a potential suitor who, while they don't have much in the way of cap space this offseason, would have the mid-level exception they could use for a player like Christian Wood to pay and operate over the tax, which initial reports have indicated Wood is seeking the mid-level exception going into free agency. So in this video, we're going to be discussing whether the Bulls pursuing Christian Wood makes sense for the roster, what his role would be on the team, as well as how it would impact other transactions for the Bulls this offseason. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. If you missed my last video, I had a chance to sit down with Will Gottlieb of CHGO, and we talked about the possibility of the Bulls adding Christian Wood among other free agents. But I wanted to talk a little more about Wood further, as I do think this is one of the few options for the Bulls in making a quote-unquote bigger move, which really isn't big. It is Christian Wood. We're not talking about a superstar player here, but a player that is productive and is enough of a talent upgrade to get somewhat excited about over, say, signing players like Andre Drummond or Goran Dragic that the Bulls picked up last season. And again, it's a realistic opportunity with the limited cap space the Bulls have, outside, of course, of blowing it up and trading the big three. Now, for those that don't know, Christian Wood is a 6'10" versatile big who can play the 4 or 5, only 27 years old, so in the peak of his prime. He was an undrafted player who had to work his way into the league by signing 10-day contracts for multiple teams, and then really started breaking out into being a bona fide NBA player in 2020 after signing a contract with the Detroit Pistons. Ended up getting traded that offseason as the Pistons pivoted into another direction, looking to rebuild, went to the Rockets and quickly became one of their best players after the departure of James Harden, and then of course more recently traded to the Dallas Mavericks this past offseason as he didn't fit the overall timeline of the Rockets team, which was now looking to tank and rebuild. And Wood was actually solid for the Dallas Mavericks. You could argue he was their second best and most reliable player on that team before they made the trade for Kyrie Irving. Wood can score, rebound, he can post up and finish around the rim, but also shoot from outside. People forget that he's a decent three-point shooter, shooting 37% from 3 on over 4 attempts per game. The year prior, he shot 39% on 5 attempts per game. Solid efficiency on that kind of volume, especially for a big man. His biggest flaws, obviously, not a good defender, not the best rim protector, which the Bulls desperately need rim protection, not a good offensive rebounder, again, something the Bulls also need that they were severely lacking on offensive reboundings this past season, as they were 28th in the league in offensive rebounding this year. And of course, Wood can be pretty inconsistent at times, which the last thing the Bulls need is another inconsistent player. But for his flaws, Christian Wood would be an upgrade in terms of their overall talent, would quickly become their 4th or 5th scoring option, again assuming the big three stays intact, and more importantly, Wood provides depth at the 4, which the Bulls have been severely lacking over the past 2 seasons, and really only having Patrick Williams as their true power forward on the roster. And even Pat, some would consider him to be more of a small forward. Now the question is, where would Wood fit on the roster, especially if you're keeping Vucevic? Well, he would be the Bulls starting power forward. I know some will ask, well, what about Patrick Williams? Well, if you guys remember, towards the end of the season, he was coming off the bench in most games, with Caruso getting the start at the 4. And Patrick actually played pretty well coming off the bench, being one of the better scorers in the second unit, having less pressure going up against opposing teams' bench. And look, as much as I want Patrick Williams' development to be prioritized, unless the Bulls tear things down and make some drastic moves to retool, which we know isn't going to happen based on what the front office has indicated to the media, then Pat's development isn't going to be a focus for a team that is supposed to be looking to win now. He can still develop coming off the bench. In fact, I would argue it might actually be better for his overall confidence with less pressure playing in the second unit. But if the front office continues to push for the now and wanting to win now and getting better now, if you bring in a guy like Christian Wood, yeah, he's going to get the start over Pat at the 4. Now, that leaves big question marks when it comes to the Bulls' overall defense in the starting unit. That's why you had guys like Caruso and Pat with the starters to provide some defensive intensity, and the Bulls would need to figure out how to balance the defense with the starting unit in the overall rotation with guys like Alex Caruso and Patrick Williams. And maybe it's a scenario where Pat does get the start to provide defense with that unit, but the rotations are such that Wood would see more minutes overall at the 4. Give the Bulls more scoring, more floor spacing, and yes, Wood can help space the floor with his ability to shoot from outside, and he helps with the overall rebounding on the team. The biggest thing holding the Bulls back from acquiring a guy like Christian Wood is how much they end up paying or re-signing guys like Vucevic and Coby White and even now Dosunmu. Because even despite the fact that the Bulls could use their full mid-level exception, which is slated to be $12.2 million for next season based on the recent changes to the CBA for non-tax-paying teams, which of course is always the Bulls, but despite all that, if the Bulls re-sign Vucevic, Coby White, and Ayo, depending on the contract figures they sign them to, they're going to be very close to approaching the tax line, which would mean they're not going to be able to pay Wood the full mid-level exception, $12.2 million, which is what he's seeking. Because we know the Reinsdorfs are not going to pay the luxury tax under any circumstances, and the only way to give Wood his full $12.2 million is to pay the luxury tax. Based on what most analysts are predicting in terms of what Vucevic and Coby will get in the form of contract extensions, Vucevic around 17 or 18 million, Coby White in the range of 14 or 15 million, they're only going to have around 6 million to spend with the mid-level exception before going into the tax. Now granted, if they're able to work out lower deals for Vucevic and Coby, say their market value isn't as high as people are projecting, then yeah, you might be able to get a player like Wood for the full $12.2 million. Or say Vucevic walks in free agency or Coby leaves because he gets an offer sheet that is just too rich to match to be able to keep him, then you would have enough to be able to sign Wood to the full mid-level exception. So there are ways to make the money work. But if I had to guess, the Bulls are most likely going to prioritize retaining Vucevic and Coby, which would mean they're not going to be able to give Wood his full MLE unless they go into the tax, which again is not going to happen. And thus the ability for the Bulls to add Christian Wood to the roster may not be as doable. I personally would like the fit though. Not saying it's ideal because Wood does have his flaws, and I don't think Christian Wood alone would be a game changer for the Bulls and suddenly turning this team around, far from it. But I like the idea of bringing in a versatile big that can give you more scoring, three-point shooting, and rebounding, all things the Bulls need. It's just the Bulls would still need some actual sharpshooters because Wood would not foot that bill. And they need some better rim protection, more specifically bigs that can actually defend the pick and roll. But I would love to hear what you guys think. How do you think Christian Wood would fit on the Bulls roster? Good move, bad move? Let me know in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.